The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
A record number of women are running for the U.S. Congress this year. Is 2018 a breakthrough year for women in politics? We ask a leader in this effort, Mary Hughes. The game is politics, the game is on. I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game. For well over a decade, Mary Hughes has been a leader in the effort to elect more women to office. A veteran political strategist and advisor to candidates for president, Congress, and the legislature, she founded Close the Gap California, which recruits progressive women to run for office. Mary, welcome. Thanks for being back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We have President Trump. We have the Me Too movement. Is 2018 one of those years? You've referenced before, there have been sort of moments in time where women make significant political advances. Is this one of those years?
I think it is. We know, looking back over the last 100 years, going back to when women got the vote, that roughly once a generation, there is a big uptick in women's interest in politics. Sometimes the breakthrough comes economically after the Second World War, for example. Sometimes it's a larger movement. Much of the activism we see today is rooted in the activism of the 1970s. So between 68 and 72, the National Organization for Women, National Women's Political Caucus, all born in that time. That culminated in a big uptick in 1992, when 24, which is called the Year of the Woman, 24 new women elected to the House and Senate, biggest number at any one time before or since. So the question, I think the signs we look for are mostly, is this like 92? And it is like 92 in lots of ways. So I think the answer is yes. All the signs would suggest women should have a very good year at the ballot box.
And before we get into what might happen this year, going back to 92 and moving forward, there have been some significant fallbacks, I guess, for lack of a better word. There have been losses. There have been a decline in the number of women, especially in California legislature.
Correct.
What happened?
You know, it's hard to say. The whole business of changing culture is always 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We know that there have been times when it appears that more women are running locally, but not at the state and federal level. Sometimes I think that has to do with the tenor of the national debate. Sometimes I think women are very practical. They look around and see, can I solve a problem? Yes, I can. I'm going to stay here and do that. Why go to Sacramento or Washington where they just talk? So I think some of it is that. Some of it is structural. In California, the rising expense of campaigns and the constant negativism has to have had some effect.
It doesn't bother men as much as it does women?
You know, I think that there is a system of mentorship, informal mentorship, that has existed since the beginning of elected office, where men attract, recruit, identify men who are like them, who they would like to see in their circle or succeeding them or taking care of their territory when they move to a higher office. We've never had enough women to establish such a pathway consistently. We're trying to do that now, but it's different. And so women's pathway in has been different. A lot of smart women look for an on-ramp to get into politics and aren't exactly sure where to go. There are many more today.
Men don't wait for permission, they just go ahead.
You know, I think that's true. They do put their hand up to be called on whether or not they know the answer. But I think
that's how I got to college.
But I think that women are more cautious. They tend to want to know, what is it I'm getting into? What does it require of me? And I think perhaps distinctly, what effect does this have on the people around me, the people I'm responsible for? How will it affect them? So there are many, many factors that go into this.
So let's get to 2018 then. I mean, clearly, I think the operating assumption is that the Me Too movement, the remarkable, for lack of a better word, rhetoric out of the Trump administration, the attitudes toward women, it's 394 women are running for the House of Representatives. Is that the right number?
No, actually, you're very close. That's just the number of women who have filed in places where filing has closed. So right now, I think as of a few days ago, we were at 347. And the previous high was 2012 at 298. So regardless, I think we're on track to get to almost 447 when all states close filing.
How much of it is the current environment and women thinking, that's it, I've got to do something?
Well, I think that's a lot of it. I think that's a lot of it. But it's, in 1992, as I said, which is sort of the precursor year, the benchmark year, there were a lot of things that came together. But there was a lit match. There was something that sparked, sort of as you just said, there was a last straw, if you will. There had been a number of discoveries that the federal government was not doing studies on women and healthcare. They were extrapolating from men's healthcare. There were clusters of breast cancer discovered around the country, not adequately being looked at or evaluated. A lot of things that seemed to be an indignity, if you will. But the lit match was Anita Hill. There was a thing that sparked. This has been a fascinating 16, 18 months because we have had an accumulation of indignities. And yes, I think that the response is not just I've had it, but this is unhealthy. This is unwholesome. This is not a country that I want to live in, raise children in, feel free to do what I need to do in. And definitely, in terms of respect, I think this has been a huge eye-opener. It's hard sometimes to walk through life and think how much you might be being disrespected. But it's been impossible to ignore that the last 18 months.
Listen, we're going to stop there and take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stick around and join us with Mary Hughes.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. Over here we have Mary Hughes from Close the Gap, California, talking about women running for office in what looks like, well, are probably historic numbers. And what you're saying about the close of filing is likely to go up. So
correct.
Are they likely to win? Does this automatically translate into wins?
Well, there's good news and there's bad news. When we say this is a historic high number of women running, it's still a fraction of the number of men running because there are also lots more men running this year. So it's just, there is a great deal of civic engagement. Women are part of that and a bigger part than they sometimes are, but there's of course, no guarantee. And there's still barriers that women face, and so...
What are those barriers?
Well, in California, it's tremendously expensive. I think people don't realize until they get into it that candidates for the assembly are having to raise $700,000 to $800,000 to be competitive, and then the independent expenditures, having nothing to do with either candidate's campaigns, are raising double that to come into the race to influence the outcome. One, that just drives an enormous amount of a candidate's time, and a lot of people aren't interested in spending time that way. But two, it's discouraging. To think that you've raised $750,000 to get your message out to the constituents you hope to represent, and what do you find? There's somebody with a bigger megaphone who's talking louder than you are about you and your race. Well, that's an unusual circumstance.
But isn't that a barrier
places.
for anybody? Why is it a particular barrier for women?
It is, I think, a particular barrier for women because they have had historically more challenging time raising money as an entry barrier. And this is what I mean. The women who proceed to the general election after June, they will be at parity with the men in terms of raising money. But when you're in a larger field, women have tended to raise at a lower level.
Yeah. There's another barrier you didn't mention, but I suspect exists, which is that there's still overt and covert sexism.
There is. I think in California we suffer it less than other parts of the country. That sexism now is so much frowned upon that it's very hard to detect or identify.
But a woman candidate might still be asked, well, who's home watching the kids, whereas a male candidate would never be asked.
That's true, but 10 years ago she wouldn't have said, actually, my partner XYZ, and by the way, did you ask Bob how he's doing with his kids? I think we're much more confident about asking those questions and just calling that out.
Yeah. So we have the Me Too movement and all the rhetoric as a catalyst. How much of the loss of Hillary Clinton's campaign was either a catalyst or a discouragement to women candidates?
Oh, I don't think it was a discouragement. I do think it was the catalyst. I think, again, if you go back to the issues of what is a wholesome in the culture, what is, where do people get their optimism about the future. I think the way Mrs. Clinton conducted herself through the campaign and through the loss has been, particularly in retrospect, encouraging to women that it is worth it. And she herself has been very clear to say that public service is worth it. So I don't think it was discouraging, disheartening, disappointing, yes. But in terms of women going in and doing battle, I think it was a silent battle cry. I think that the disappointment turned into resolve. I think the president was the lit match of this election coming up. He is the catalyst. His continuous disrespect is something that drives women who are running for office, and the women supporting them, and women voters. So I think you're going to see an uptick in all of those.
It's we talked about the barriers that may be unique to gender, and a lot of it's got to do with just prior experience and sort of a context in which you get ready to run. I mean, a lot of men grow up thinking they're going to be president. They don't have to be invited to do so. Do women campaign differently, and do they govern differently?
Well, I think campaigning is so much of what you have to do to campaign well is dictated. I think women candidates tend to believe that they are better one-on-one, whether that is just a desire to connect with people or some inhibition about speaking in the arena. I'm not sure, but I do hear that a fair amount in terms of campaigning. Where I think the differences come are when you have a cohort of women in a legislative body. We've been able to study that pretty thoroughly, and we know that women change what's on the agenda, they change the procedures, the content, and they change sometimes the outcome in legislation. And here's what I mean. Women use the entire experience their entire experience when approaching policy making. So they are mindful when they're looking at legislation about in-home health care. what that means if you're the mother of young children or you're a caretaker for your grandparents. And that point of reference plays heavily into the priority you give that issue. So women are bringing a much broader set of perspectives and experiences than have previously been in legislatures. That changes what goes on an agenda. Women have led the way in terms of opening up procedures. They are for transparency. They post their schedules and they want more inclusion. An interesting study a while back identified the fact that traditionally excluded groups will approach women first for entry into a policy discussion in a legislature. So we know that they bring a different perspective, that they approach how things should be done differently. And it's interesting, there's a wonderful group called Rachel's Network that is women supporting environmental policies. And they have identified that environmentalism is one of the issues on which women will cross party lines to protect the environment. So there are more, but they have a really wonderful study. So there's quite a bit that changes when women are in a legislature.
The U.S. Senate, I think, is one of the places where we're seeing an example of that.
Well, the now 23 women, and we should tell folks that we are actually just 1 week past the Congress hitting 20% female representation. So 23 senators, and I think we're at 19.8 in the House, but we're now 20%. But yes, the bipartisan monthly dinners among the women senators that are exclusively for the members have produced a number of collaborations, a lot of co-sponsorships, and the women tend to hold to just a couple of really smart rules, I think. They don't speak ill of each other in the press. They don't divulge what they discuss when they're together in a bipartisan group socially. And I think it's turned out well on the budget. I know they had an alternative. They had a solution to the Farm Bill problem. So, yeah, they've done some great work.
Yeah. We're going to take another break. Stick around. We'll be right back with Mary Hughes.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. Mary Hughes is here from Close the Gap, California. You're involved in a number of races here in California. Are there any races, any women to watch? Women that you think we may not hear about them this time, although they may win, but that we could see them coming along and being somebody that we'll all know about in a few years?
Well, there's quite a lot to watch. It's going to be a fun year to watch. But first, I would say, you know, the hardest job to win, of course, is the governor's race, and that's a very tough one. One woman, our former superintendent running, Delane Easton, who's not yet in double digits in polling, and I think for women in California, they have their eye on that prize. Yeah. So it's helpful to look at the women running for the 8 statewide offices. And of course, Betty Yee, who's been our controller, is running and seems to be in great shape. But there are 2 women running for lieutenant governor and treasurer, respectively. Eleni Kounalakis in a field of, I think, 3 men, with 3 men. And a first-time candidate, former ambassador, And I would keep an eye there. I think that's going to be very vigorous, both in the primary and then in the general again. And then Fiona out of San Francisco, who has been probably one of the best prepared people for the job she's running for. She has been an accountant. She has been in the legislature and on the Board of Equalization, now running for treasurer. So I think those are the marquee races where you'll see women contending. We just had a very good indicator of what might happen. In the past 6 months, we've had 4 special elections in the legislature in California. And women have won or come in first in 3 of the 4. There was those young women, the 2 who outright were elected, Wendy Carrillo, took a seat vacated when the member went to Congress, and Sidney Kamlager. Both from Los Angeles, both very well acquainted with public policy. Sidney chaired the board, the community college board in LA. Wendy was on the radio and had been an organizer. And these 2 young women, I think, are worth watching. They're there. They're going to be there. And they, I think, will be the vanguard of this new generation of women coming into the legislature. In the other 2 special elections, we still have runoffs, but there was a young woman there who finished first by a long shot, Luz Rivas, and I think Luz will be part of this group in the vanguard as well. So one very good sign, 3 out of 4 of these specials going to young women, and then these women in particular, I think, unlike some of the folks we were talking about earlier, these women are ready to go. They know the system. They know how it operates. Sidney, in fact, has been a district director for Senator Holly Mitchell. So they are now, some of them, taking the route that previously young men have taken to catapult into positions quickly of influence in the legislature.
Is that the key? I mean, remember the famous quote from Abraham Lincoln when he lost his congressional race? He said, "Well, I'll study and get ready." And his career turned out okay. Is that a key? Is developing a bench?
You know, I think it's partly developing a bench, and we're certainly doing that. There are a number of Close the Gap California is one, but we work closely with Emerge California. We work with other women's organizations. Emily's List has been a long-time presence now in the state. They're beginning to look at and identify and support women for the state legislature, understanding how critical that pathway is. So the answer is yes. There is much more opportunity, many more on-ramps.
You focus not just on women, but progressive women.
Yes.
How do you define that?
Well, at Close the Gap, we define it this way. Women who are pro-choice, women who are pro-public schools, and women who are path out of poverty. One of the things we don't very often talk about because it's such a challenging issue is the fact that California has the widest wealth gap in the country, and 70% of those who are under the poverty line in California are women and children. So for us, if progressive women aren't going to put poverty at the top of their list, who will? So that's important. And what we're looking for is women who will work together to find ways to lift groups out of poverty and to create many more ways that we can change the situation, particularly for women and children.
Yeah. I want to ask a broader political question. The decline in civility in our public discourse.
Yeah.
You've been involved for a long time.
Long time.
I think you've always had a reputation as someone who's serious and sober about the issues that we talk about and not looking for whatever advantage you might be able to gain, no matter what the cost to the person you're representing. Are you concerned about it? Do you see it changing? And I guess related to women, does that change as more women are involved in politics?
Well, we hope so.
Yeah.
We hope so. But here's the thing. At the same time that you want to preserve whatever integrity or sense of civility that women might bring into the system, they want to win and we want them to win. And so you really have to take a look at the rules of engagement. And I put a lot of emphasis on educating women about saying yes and no to consultants and teams of managers and pollsters and media people. And campaigns are complex and they're expensive. And candidates always are weighing, if this person is an expert advisor and I'm just learning how to do this, why would I challenge them? And I do encourage women to challenge them and to win on their own terms, to be smart. But to our earlier point about experience with campaigning, that's not always, they don't always have that reservoir of understanding about what's a smart tactic and what's just a cheap shot, right?
Yeah.
So we hope they get more.
We've got 30 seconds left, so I'm going to ask you real quick. You're at 20%-ish now.
Yes.
After this election, where do you think you'll be in how long before you're at 50?
You know, we in California at Close the Gap, we've set 2028 as our goal to get north of 40%, and I think that's doable. We're at 23.5 now in the state legislature. I think we get to 28 after this election, maybe 30.
Well, that's all we have time for. Mary Hughes, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. And join us next time on The Game.